Good evening, everybody. Tonight we are working on Chapter 11. The topic is jQuery. I know that many of the students that are in this class currently are often taking the Web Programming 2 class at the same time. And you guys will see that there's a bit of overlap, at least in conception, as far as what this technology is and does. And so I'm not going to really spend as much time as I have in some of my older videos that you'll find within the course shell, really kind of explaining what jQuery is. Let's suffice it to say that jQuery is basically a JavaScript library, arguably the most important JavaScript library, that allows us a way to easily affect any elements within the HTML DOM structure with a pre-built library of methods and functions and routines that you can basically, if you know what they do and how to call them, it's just a matter of usually sending parameters to them, choosing the right selectors, and being able to create some pretty impressive effects with very little coding. And because of its ease of use and almost universal acceptance, I would basically say that this is a required technology at this point that you know as a web developer. If you're really looking to learn about it in depth on your own, there's lots of really cool stuff on lynda.com. You guys all know that you have access with your student accounts. But also, if you just go to W3 schools and find the jQuery section, so you can see in the JavaScript section, right after they teach you JavaScript, the next thing they teach you is jQuery. And then you also notice that in this list here on the left in the JavaScript section, notice some of the other technologies that they're considering pretty important. JSON, we've learned about that in the other class too. We don't talk about it too much in here, but I think maybe in the database chapters they do. We learned about AJAX last week and the importance of that. Notice the one that I'm hovering over right now, AngularJS, and that's kind of an interesting one because it is one that's pretty hot out in the field. One that you don't really see a lot in a lot of books are the ones I'm hovering over now, which are Bootstrap, and that really technically falls into the CSS section. But I'm going to tell you guys, because we don't formally teach it in our program, but you've noticed that when you create new projects in Visual Studio and you use a pre-built template, that Bootstrap is now standard in Visual Studio since version 2015. So when you build like a pre-existing ASP.NET application with their framework, Bootstrap is just there, right? Dreamweaver, same thing. Although with Dreamweaver, it's an option to have it present or not. And basically all that technology is a way for you to create responsive layouts by using a lot of short codes, kind of the same way that jQuery allows us to do some really powerful JavaScript stuff by using short codes in a sense, so you don't have to code it all by hand. The one thing that is also happening that's really kind of huge is that W3 schools, and I'm trying to figure out where they have it on their site, they have a technology, okay, they call it W3 CSS, but what this is basically is CSS grid. So it is basically Bootstrap-like. It's kind of a clone of it, but what they're moving to do is make it a standard. So when you see them pushing it like this, you can say that in the near future this might be something you have to know as a developer. Now, knowing what stuff we teach you here and what stuff we don't, if I were you and I was going out to get a job, I would at least explore AngularJS, I would explore Bootstrap, I would explore the W3 CSS or CSS grid as they call it. Oh, no, please. Okay, those are pre-compilers, right? SAS, SCSS, CoffeeScript for JavaScript is also the same kind of thing. That's another thing, some design houses use them, and some design houses are like, whatever, we can just code it by hand. But what those are what we call pre-compilers. So you write code in a shortened version. In fact, Jason, why don't we, since you're talking about it, let's Google it. And there is a site here they'll tell you about it, and I haven't been here for a while, so I don't know where to find an example. So maybe maybe under the Learn section. All right. So with this technology here, what it allows you to do is, instead of using like regular CSS, you use kind of like a shortcut. And what they're showing you here is a before and after. And I don't think that's a really good example.
I never really understood, because it's not like CSS is all that long anyway.
No, it's not. But what happens is they give you this capability. So for example, see the dollar sign there? Right? From PHP, you guys know that's an identifier for a variable. So what they're doing in this language is they're allowing you to create a variable in your CSS. So if you were declaring, let's say, a font type to be used in multiple places on a page, you could pre-declare it, if you're using the same ones over and over again, as a variable, and then wherever you've got that variable inserted into your code, like here, when it compiles, it will insert the fonts for you automatically. What's the advantage? That's correct. So you can change one spot in your code and change your whole document. That's really the most powerful feature of it, I think. There are some other ones, where there's like short code versions of this, where this looks a lot like regular CSS, add the variables. But there's other ones where it's like you don't have to use the same syntax, and you pre-compile and then it generates it for you. Well, it is a library they have to install. Yeah, not just a library. But that's a great question, though. But really, this kind of leads to our whole discussion that we were having before the video started about how you guys need to be on top of what's happening out in the field, because you're going to walk into places and you're going to want those skills. Maybe you don't have the skill, but if you've at least investigated it, read about it, maybe played with it a little bit, even if it's on W3 Schools, you can walk in and say, well, I really haven't used it much, but I do know this, and that about it, and it's like, okay, well, you're trainable, right? Rather than you walking in and going, what's SAS, right? You don't want to be in that situation, so you need to be on top of it. All right, well, let's go back over to the book and get cranking on some of this stuff. They have a kind of an introduction here, and I'm going to let you read that on your own. There is actually a website for jQuery. jQuery is an open source project. I forget who originally begun it, but Google seems to be one of the main proponents of it, and one of the reasons why it originally caught on so heavily. You can come here and you can download the libraries. What we're going to learn today is that Visual Studio, and you've learned this in Web 2 already if you're in that class, has the tools built in that automatically pull jQuery into your project. You can, though, come to these websites here and download the code directly, and you can either get the latest version or you can find archived versions as well if you're working with certain features that might not be compliant. But jQuery is one of these weird technologies that allows us to do some really powerful things with minimal code, and that's really kind of the crux of why it's so popular. The other thing is it affects the DOM very easily without a lot of syntax to learn, which for me was a big thing. Now, we haven't done much of this, or if any of this in this class so far, which, because I'm teaching Web 2 this semester also, with many of the same people in the same class here in class, I get there's kind of like this blur that happens. But we're going to be looking at how you add libraries and what we call packages to your project. And Visual Studio actually has the NuGet package manager. In the old days, it had a command line based tool called Package Manager that still exists. So it's a console thing, and it still works if you know what commands to type in. Unfortunately, most people don't, right? So the package manager like NuGet is considered an improvement. One thing that you will find that is not included in our book is there's actually a new package manager, and I haven't really explored it much, but notice that we're going to be doing this in a little bit, where we're going to manage NuGet packages. So we bring up this tool that allows us to download stuff, but there's this new one, and that's certainly not in our textbook. And it's one that I'm just starting to explore, but it seems to do a lot of the same stuff that NuGet does, and there must be a reason why they're including this now as maybe either a future thing that's going to take over or just an alternate that might offer different resources. So I think it's kind of curious, but feel free to explore. I know that I've installed jQuery through this, and we're just about to go through and install jQuery through this tool in just a couple of minutes. All right. Now, it's kind of a pain, I will tell you, if you're a developer and you want to get the jQuery libraries and you have to go out to the website and download them and extract them and then copy them into your folders. It's kind of like a process, right? Now, experienced developers will probably have little shortcuts already set up, like where you just have a folder on your desktop with jQuery, you just drag it into your project and add a link and boom, you're done, right? So you can say, what's the big deal? There are other packages, though, that you might add, and there's literally thousands of them that get a lot more complex and have more than just a few JavaScript files in them. In fact, some of them have some real heavy content in there, and some of them require other packages to be installed in the process as well. So let's go ahead and get to the exercise, and as we do the exercise, I'll do a little bit of explaining. All right. So we are assuming that you do have your project open from last week, and I happen to be pulling up an older copy. Here in class, we didn't do Chapter 10 in class last week because it was Good Friday, so we had that day off, so I had you guys work off the archive videos, and hopefully they were helpful. So I'm working off of last year's code right now, my completed version of Chapter 10, and if you want to get a laugh here, on the folder name I put I hope, because I hoped it was done. I did test it before class this time, and it is actually working. But just in case. All right, so I'm going to take the book, pull it off to the other screen like I normally do. All right, and then what we're going to do is, my preferred way to bring up the NuGet package manager is always to go to the root of the site and just do a right click and then manage NuGet packages. The book does indicate, though, that you can actually go to the tools library and find it there. And notice right down here, they have the same tool available. There's also the ability here to actually access the console. And in the days when I first started using Visual Studio, when you would install a package, the package manager console was the new tool that I could go to, and somebody would give you the command and you type it in and you pull down your packages rather than download, extract, and move them over. So it shows you how things progress over time. But that tool still is available, but you do need to know the exact command to type to bring in the tool. Cumbersome. All right. Our approach will be this right-click, manage NuGet, and then it brings up this window in Visual Studio 2017. If you are using an older version of Visual Studio, it will not open up as a full tab like this. It will actually open up as a window that sits in front like it does in the book. The dialog for this newer version, and I forget if they changed it in 2015 or 2017, looks like this. So if you compare to what's in the book, and you're going back a couple of pages here, this window would normally pop up. It really still offers all the same features that are on this screen. They're just called different things now. Or not called different things, but they're located in different places. It's just more modern and sleek. When we're going to add a package, we definitely want to go to the Browse area to add it. And the thing that we are going to do, and you can see the way that they've set this up now, and this is, I think, kind of interesting, is they have at the top of this list the stuff that people add most often. So you see Bootstrap in there, you see MySQL, you see some JSON tools, you see jQuery in there. And the thing that you should do is you should actually maybe even look through here and see what kind of stuff is out there. And this is just a generic list, and I think it's based on popularity more than anything else. I'm not sure what their their rationale is. But whenever you don't see what you're looking for real quickly, remember they got this search box up here, so you can just type in jQuery. This is my pattern for doing it. And that, of course, will pull up anything that's got jQuery in there. The thing that's really fascinating about jQuery is jQuery has what we call their core library, and then they also have alternative libraries. So for example, if I pull this package into Visual Studio, it will pull in the full library, and then it also pulls in a minified version. And a minified version, which we're going to take a look at, is basically a way to take all that jQuery code and they shorten it all down, squeeze out all the spaces and indents and long variable names and function names, and condense it down into something that looks like garbage on the screen, but it does all the same stuff. And the thought is a minified version runs faster because the computer has to read less code. But it will also bring in, for Visual Studio, the IntelliSense tools so that when you're typing jQuery commands, it'll help you auto-complete them. A lot of other editors do not do that. The other thing that you'll see is that there's also a whole bunch of different jQuery tools. So for example, those of you that might have been in the graphics programming class, if you're following the old degree track, will recognize the jQuery user interface library, which is jQuery, but it's designed to create user interface components real easily by just using a couple of keywords. So I know in HTML5 now, like if we put in input of type date and you click on the box, it brings up a calendar automatically. That was not included prior to HTML5. If we wanted that effect to happen, jQuery user interface is one of the tools that we use to make it happen. There's also jQuery mobile libraries, which are really huge in mobile development, and I would encourage you guys to explore. Some of the high-end editors, Visual Studio is one of them, Dreamweaver is the other, have the jQuery mobile libraries that you can pull in just like this, and then it allows you to basically create these really slick-looking, professional, mobile layouts with absolute minimum of code. All you're really doing is you're adding a couple little attributes to HTML tags, and boom, you have this thing that looks like most apps out there. You know, so how do people do the work? They use these shortcuts, folks. They don't code it all from scratch. All right. Enough about that. Let's go ahead and choose the jQuery library and hit installed. Let's do that. And then I'm going to say OK. It is warning you that it's changing our solution. Now what you're seeing in the output window below is what we would have saw if we were running the console, and it shows you all the stuff that's being downloaded and whether it worked or not, and that's some useful information. So really what's happening in the background here, folks, is it's opening up an internet connection, it's going to the jQuery website, it's finding the repository, downloading it, unzipping it, and putting it into your project for you. That's pretty cool, right? That's a couple button clicks easier than probably even doing it manually. So can't really complain about that. All right, so that actually completes the first try it out exercise, believe it or not. If you have accomplished that, go ahead and close that tab, and then you'll notice if you open up your scripts folder, and my Web 2 people will already know this backwards and forwards, you'll see all the different jQuery libraries. This one here, just single clicking, not double clicking, is the whole jQuery library written in a comfortable looking code fashion with indents, spaces, explanations, comments, etc. Yes, it is open source. You can actually read through this. How many lines of code are we talking about? Oh, what is it, 10,000? That's not too bad, right? But all of jQuery is contained in that library, at least the core library. Remember I told you about the minified version? This is the same library, condensed down, all white spaces, indents, and excessively long variable names, function names, all removed, truncated, and then how many lines of code do we have here? 2. And the first line is the comment. So what they're doing is they're taking all the code and they're squeezing it onto one line. Why? Because the computer reads it faster. You want to read 10,000 lines of code, or you want to read one line of code? Granted, that one line is very long, but it is still significantly less in size to read, than otherwise. There are other ways to do jQuery. And one thing I do want to point out with that, and I often tell students that, if I'm doing a project myself, and granted, these days I don't do a lot of side projects anymore, but in the old days when I would include jQuery, what I would do is I would just very simply, and I'm thinking W3 Schools probably has the best example of it. I'm just going to go to their try it out editor, and then notice what they have. They don't download a darn thing. What all they're doing is they're pointing to the jQuery libraries that are out on where? Google servers. Why? Well, first of all, no download, no install. I drop in that one line, it pulls in all the same resources. The other thing is, keep this in mind, as people are surfing the internet, a lot of developers use this approach. So there's a very good chance that this library is already cached on the user's computer. So if it's 10,000 lines of code, or one that's really long, it's pulling it in all that much faster because it's already on the machine. So that was always my rationale for using this approach. So you can use this approach and it does work. Clearly, working in Visual Studio, I guess you can't guarantee that people have an internet connection. It's kind of assumed. I don't know how you would get the package otherwise, I suppose. But some people do prefer to have the files local. My personal preference, and this is kind of like professional advice to you guys, you are better off using Google servers to pull the code in than your own. If you have some reason not to, I suppose you can customize things too, but just the rationale and something for you guys to think about for sure. All right, so let's move on now. I'm at the top of page 393. We're at the next try it out. And what they want us to do is work with the Frontend Master. So let's go ahead and open up the Master Pages folder, bring up that Frontend Master. All right, and then they want us to find the Script Manager control. And then they want us to do a couple of tweaks. So the Script Manager, if you guys remember from the last chapter, is right here. And, what they're doing is they're actually creating a little bit of space here. So I'm going to try to kind of condense this down to make it look a little bit more like the book. And then in between here, they're dropping in this code. And I'm going to go ahead and do the indents for us so it looks nicer. Notice what this is doing. It's just pointing to the jQuery library that we have loaded. But I copy and pasted this code from the book, right? Is this going to work?
No.
No. And the why is? Yeah, very, very good. So you see right here, the jQuery that we pulled in was 3.3.1. So it's gone through a couple of iterations since our book was printed. So we want to change these numbers here to make sure it matches that. And since we're using the min library, we want to make sure it's exactly like that. So it's going to be 3.3.1. I'm going ahead and I'm doing a Control S to save. And the book tells us to actually close this file. So if you want to do that, go ahead. All right, so on step number 3, it says to try this out, we're going to create a new web form in the demos folder. So let's do that. Let's go to the demos folder. Let's do a right click. And then go ahead and do a right click. And then we're going to add a new web form. They want us to call it jQuery, which is jQuery. They use a capital Q. You don't really have to, but you can if you want. And they want us to add a title, jQuery demo. All right. Oh, but what didn't I do? I built the web form. So now, because now I'm on step 4 and I'm realizing I should have used my base page, right? I always forget to do that. All right. Well, that was a good example of how to do it without a base page, just in case you forgot. So I'm actually going to delete that, just in case you forgot how to do that. And then we're going to go ahead and actually use this approach here. How quickly we forget, right? All right, that's a little bit better. And then the spot where they want us to add the title, obviously, is here. And then in the content placeholder in step number 4, they have a bunch of code. And what I'm going to do is I'll just paste it in, and then we'll take a look. And then I'm going to highlight in format just to make it look a little nicer. All right, let's talk about a little bit about how jQuery works. One of the real key components of it, and I know that our author has this tendency of like, you do it first and then talks about how it works later, which works in some scenarios, but I always kind of like to talk about it while I'm doing it, and then we save that part of it. But the crux of jQuery is both in its selector structure and its function calls, and the ability of chaining those function calls. In essence, remember folks, it is JavaScript, so a lot of JavaScript conventions apply. But what we're seeing here is anywhere where there is a $, that's our first clue, and I should say a $, followed by parentheses. That's our first clue that we're working with jQuery. So this is a jQuery statement. In fact, the first part of a jQuery statement typically is what we call the selector. Now, what the selector is basically whatever we use in the HTML DOM, just like we do for either regular JavaScript or, more importantly, CSS to select any item on the page. When I say $document, what does that refer to? The document that we're loading up. And this is a real common thing that you'll see in jQuery is the document ready function. If you've learned your JavaScript, and you might be taking that course simultaneously right now, that's kind of equivalent to like window on load, or in the old days, body on load. So it was just like the page loads, then we run this function. So this is called the document ready function. On the line below it, we're going to see a selector, and whatever goes inside the quotes, inside those parentheses, is the exact same selector that you would use in CSS to style something. So if I see that it says # main content, that tells me I have something on my page that's got an ID attribute of main content. Notice the next thing that follows it is a period. So we use this dot notation to kind of do separation. So we select our object first, and then we usually run functions on it. So there is a jQuery function called CSS, and the parameters that you pass to it are which CSS property you're affecting and what the value is. So it's pretty easy to figure out that if I say ID main content CSS background color green, it's going to take that object on the screen and change the background color. And in fact, what it's really doing is it's dynamically writing CSS for you on the fly. So instead of embedding that CSS into your CSS document, it is generating the CSS as we go. So now, that's pretty powerful, just that little bit alone, because really what we're doing is we're adding the capability of being able to, on the fly, affect the appearance of a document. And that's just the first step here, folks. There's so much more we can do. So these are really simple little things. In the second one, we do something a little bit more sophisticated. So once again, we're selecting an object that's got an ID of button 1, and this time we're using the click function. All right? So what are we waiting to see is clicked? Well, the object that we're pointing to, right? So, okay, apparently it's a button, and then we're clicking, and then what happens when we click? Inside the parentheses then, you're going to see that there's a function call. Notice the function call is unnamed. This is known as an anonymous function. That means it happens brute force in place. We're not giving it a name because we don't want any other part of our application to be able to call that function. It should only happen when that particular button is clicked. You absolutely can. You could put a name in there and it'll work just the same. You might not ever call it.
Syntax just function, the name of the function, or just the name of the function?
Oh boy, that's a great question, Jason. Yeah, in some cases, you can actually just call the function name directly.
Okay.
All right. So if you start digging into like the little tidbits of what it does, yeah, that's true. Here, because it's an anonymous function that's in place, we need to actually declare all of it here. So otherwise, yeah, you're right. You could actually just call the function by name, a comma, and then add whatever other attributes.
The same thing in multiple buttons.
Correct. Absolutely. All right. So then once we get inside that function, you can see that we're calling more jQuery. Main content, we're changing the background color to red. And then notice this next one. And really, the way you guys want to read this is all one line. And this ability of jQuery to first do a selector, a dot, call a function, passing parameters, and then another dot, and another function, that's called chaining. So a chained capability in jQuery allows us to call a function on an object, then call another one, and then call another one, and you can keep going. So we could change the CSS, animate it, hide it, show it, whatever. And we can just keep adding them on. So that's kind of one of the capabilities that jQuery gives us in the library. But notice what this does here. It says animate, width 100 pixels, height 800 pixels. So it looks to me like we're changing the size of the object. So I guess it depends on what size it is to begin with, right? So the proof is in the pudding, as they say. So let's go ahead and save this, and then let's open up this page in the browser and see what it does. So there's our button. There's our main content area, which is green, right? I'm going to click the button. How do you like that? Change the background to red, and then it changed the width from whatever it was to 100 pixels. And can I refresh this page? And then I want to click the button, and when you not only does it change, but you notice that the animation is actually, it's not like instantaneous from 800 to whatever to 100 pixels. There's a movement to it. That's why it's called animate. And you can actually tweak those animation controls. And one of the coolest things about jQuery are those animation capabilities. Because I'll tell you, folks, we used to spend a lot of time writing JavaScript to do really silly looking stuff. And then somebody came up with this library and made our life a whole lot easier. So why not use it? Comment?
Yeah, there's also a library that ties into jQuery where you can make things actually rotate on the page. There's a library.
Yeah, there's a lot of really cool ones. And keep in mind, jQuery is not the only library out there. There's many, many libraries. It's just by far the most popular. So the thing that I also find fascinating, and this is the kind of thing you guys should start getting into the mindset of doing, is whenever you look at a page, right, look at the page source, right? And I was making this distinction for somebody this past week, right? If you are on a page and you do a right-click view source, what you see in the view source window is the code that your server sent to your browser. Whether that code is back-end generated or it's static. Then, if you instead do an inspect, right? And what I'd like to do here is actually move this off to the side. I think that'll work a little bit better. And what I'm looking for is that main content, right? So let's see if we can find that main content area here. There. There's JavaScript happening, right? Here we go, page wrapper. Okay, main content. So I got that highlighted. So we see what CSS is actually running in the background. So you guys see that? And you guys notice the 659 here? And then when I click this button, did you guys see this stuff change in the side there? So whenever you're running this inspect element tool, the inspect element tool only displays the results of what's happening in the window, whereas the view source tool shows you what was sent to the browser to begin with, which is different than this. This is the resulting version of what's happening. So that's kind of interesting. You can watch it in action again by just doing a refresh, and then hitting the button, watch those CSS styles change. Because really what we're getting here on the right-hand side is a dynamic output of what's happening on the web page, which is kind of cool, I think. Kind of interesting to watch. All right. Let's go ahead and close that. Let's go back over to our browser. So that completed that next try it out exercise. The author goes into kind of a little bit of a diatribe here about some of the basic CSS features about how selectors work. What would an asterisk do as a selector? Yeah, selects everything on the page. Wow, this might actually be a real simple way to write a script where I could put a button on a page, set up a button, right, and then have that button trigger all the fonts changing on the page. Real simple. Almost too simple. You can do some pretty sophisticated things, including taking an object that's on the screen and adding a new class name to it dynamically. Why would you do that? Because maybe that class has got a different style on it, right? So you could apply a new class to an object and have it change as a result. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no doubt. All right. Now let's move on to the next little exercise here. This should go pretty quick also. You do want us to go back to the Frontend Master, so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to close the jQuery demo, collapse that down, open up the Frontend Master. And here we are going to work at the bottom of the page, so right below the footer, after the div ends, but still inside of the form. We're going to add a little content placeholder ASP tag. I'm going to go ahead and indent that right away. And believe it or not, that's all we're doing. All right, so go ahead and save that. And they say close it, so I will do that. And now we're going to go back to the demos page and going to create another new file. Right. Once again, let's make sure that we do that based on our base page. The name they want us to use is Basic Selectors. One thing I'm going to make note of as we start working with the code that we're getting to in just a couple of steps is I want you to remember that when you're working with jQuery selectors, anything that's valid in CSS, anything, and I'm talking about like nth child or starts with or is kind of like, any of those syntaxes that you use will work inside those quotes. So you can actually do some pretty sophisticated selecting when it comes right down to it. All right, so we are now on, well, they want us to go to design view, so let's do that. And then they want us to find that little element that we added at the bottom, which is right down here. So that's this white box. And just make sure you have the right tool. So you should click on it, and it should say CP client script on the master. All right. And what they want us to do is open up the Smart Task panel that's attached to this. And if you remember, we're going to use this little arrow here on the right. And then we're going to use create custom content right there. And really what we're doing is we're just showing it how to do this. We're going to switch back over to source code view. And then I want to make sure I'm putting this in the right spot. In the main content section, they do want us to add just some real basic HTML. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're just creating an H1 and a div with an ID. And then step number 6, they want us to take the script that's listed and paste it in the new script area down here. I'm going to go ahead and highlight and format this like so. And then let's just take a look at the code real quick before we go getting crazy here. First, you can see that they're basically giving us a combination of different selector types just so you got to get used to it. So the asterisk, of course, is a universal selector. It's going to affect everything. That means all the text on the page is going to be green. Next one affects an ID. Sidebar is an ID. There we're changing the CSS, the border bottom to 2 pixels solid red, so we'll see that. The next one, we're just selecting a native HTML tag, so we just state it, H1. And on that one, notice we're not changing CSS here. What we're doing is we're actually binding an event handler. So we're binding the click event, which will then trigger an anonymous function, which triggers a JavaScript alert. Pretty neat. So in other words, we click on the H1, and an alert pops up. That's pretty powerful. Next one, we're selecting a class. On that one, we're adding a class to it called please wait, and then what do you suppose that does? I'm going to hide it 5,000 times? 5 seconds, that's right, because those are milliseconds. So 1,000 seconds, or 1,000 milliseconds per second. So over 5 seconds, it will disappear. That's kind of neat. The next one, notice that we're using multiple selectors. And remember what I said, whatever you can do in CSS, you can do between those quotes. So here we are actually putting in 2 native HTML tags that will be selected. And notice here, they're going to slide up slowly and then slide down slowly. How far to where? I'm not really sure, but it's kind of generic, but you'll see as we experiment. And then notice the last selector is kind of a combination one. It is a sidebar that's an image, or is it an image that's inside of a thing that's got an ID? Right. Okay, so any image inside the sidebar is going to fade out. And it's going to fade to what? 0.1. What do you think? Oh, yeah, it is. So over 5 seconds, it's going to drop down to 10% opacity. So we'll barely be able to see it. If I set it to 0, it would disappear. All right. Let's go ahead and save our changes, folks. This is like fun stuff, really. So let's go ahead and view that page in the browser. And just watch what happens. Oh, It crashes. Okay, so let's see if we can figure out why. So we're reading through the code here, and one of my students here picked up really quick that the exception is page cannot be untitled page. Okay, well, I guess I didn't title the page like it told me to, because I just like scooted right over it. So let's go back and actually title the page. One of my favorites, whatever. Save it, and let's request it again, and this time it should load up. Okay, do we need to do that again? So remember all the changes? Well, one of them was all the text is green. It is. The sidebar's got a border at the bottom. That's 2 pixels solid red. The H1, if we click it, oh, we didn't do that, right? Brings up an alert. We added a class of please wait and hide 5,000 to sample class. Where's sample class? Well, that's that div that was there and then disappeared. See, and it's got the little animation going with it too. And remember, the please wait thing is the thing that we brought in from the last chapter, which is the little animated GIF. And then we also had the footer and the header slide up slow and slide down slow. Let's do a refresh again. You see that on a lot of websites though, don't you? Right? It's kind of a, well, can be a nice effect or a cheesy one. And then here, watch the image in the sidebar as I refresh. Full visibility in over 5 seconds. It fades down to 10% opacity. So that's an example of how all those selectors work with kind of a smattering of different little, jQuery functions in there to have fun with. All right, we're picking up now at the very bottom of page 400, top of 401, which is the next try it out exercise. And this is setting up a demo page. So step 1 says create a new page based on your custom template and call it jQuery demos. It doesn't tell us where to put it, so I'm just going to put it in the demos set folder. That just seems logical to me. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to close the basic selectors. Let's right-click, add new item, base page, and the name is jQuery demos. All right. Let's be smart and give it a title so we don't get that error. Gotta be creative. And then in the main content placeholder area, we're going to paste in the following code, which is listed in step 1, just some basic HTML. But what we're doing here is we're just setting up some things on the page that are going to allow us to do some interactions. I'm going to go ahead and do a format on that. And that looks a little bit different, right? It's a little bit easier to read. But just a table and some form elements. Step number 2. It says add a content block for the CP client script below CP main content. Now, if you guys remember how to do that, we do have to go to the design view. And somebody in class had this issue, that even though this is on the master page, it's not going to generate any code for you in the code view until you do this step. So that step is actually required if you're wondering why it didn't show up. And so now we have that area, and then inside this area we're going to add a script that I'm copying and pasting. And then let's format it right away. You can see it says examples go here, and obviously we haven't added those yet, but we will be. Like in the next step. So let's go ahead and add this code here. So we're going to affect the demo table, which obviously must be the table. What are we doing? Background is green. Let's save that. And then let's go ahead and launch. Oh. It's pretty exciting stuff, isn't it? Actually, it kind of is. All right. Then what we're doing here is we're going to go through like basically a series of little examples. And so the pattern's going to be go back to this demo page, do a Control-Z to get rid of what we pasted. Hopefully that's what we pasted, yep. And then in the next exercise, we're going to do some other stuff. Right, there's quite a bit of content that they're talking about. I'm expecting that you guys read that and try to study it a little bit. Let me go ahead and save that at this point. All right, so now I'm at the top of page 410, and this part is, it says animating the contact form. All right, so we want to actually go to our control at this point for the contact form. So that's in the controls folder. We want to be in code view, or markup view if you want to call it that. All right, and basically I'm going to read what it says here in the book. It says, we're going to start adding additional text paragraph below the message sent label. This paragraph will be visible after the form has been submitted and remains visible even after the message sent text has been hidden. All right, so you guys remember doing that last chapter. Within the paragraph tags, we're going to add some text that thanks the user for his response, and then we're going to do a couple of other little things. So I want you to really pay close attention to the fact here that we need to find the ASP label, and there's so much text on the page here, I think I'm just going to oh, it's right there on my screen. A little too obvious, I guess. And what we need to do is actually add a CSS class to it, right to that tag. So you can put that anywhere. I'm just going to drop it right in the middle. Doesn't really matter because it's an attribute. Next thing they want us to do is wrap the entire table that holds the form controls with a div with an ID of table wrapper. So I need to find the top of the table, which is right here, and let's add a line there, and paste in a div, and then we need to close that div down here. And as I usually like to do in these types of situations, is I usually put comments in saying closes table wrapper. Right? Because otherwise you don't know what your div is closing. All right. Step number 3 goes into kind of a long discussion here about how in older versions of Visual Studio, we're talking pre-2012, that there was no IntelliSense for jQuery. They did add it to the libraries for Visual Studio just to make things easier, and I think it was the 2012 version that introduced it. I don't think it was there in 2010. And it does help. So if you're typing up the stuff manually, it will auto-suggest stuff like any other JavaScript or HTML tools were, and that's actually pretty handy. All right, what we do want to do is we want to add a file now to our scripts folder. So let's go to our scripts folder. Let's go ahead and add a file to the scripts folder. and we are just adding a JavaScript file, and it should be called underscore references .js. And then we also want to put in a reference to our jQuery. Remember, you can just do that with a drag and drop, just so we have that. All right. I'm using the full library, but you can do the min if you want. It doesn't matter. The whole reason that we're doing this is to basically enable this IntelliSense tool. By virtue of having the references here, it enables the IntelliSense for all your jQuery typing. Otherwise, the IntelliSense won't work. So it's kind of like a manual process you have to do to kind of trigger it. Back over to the form control. It says scroll down to the end of the controls markup and add a script element. So that's going to be right at the bottom here. And the point of this is that when you go and submit the form, this code is going to trigger. And notice that the selector inside the function is pointing towards the form tag, the native HTML tag, and it's going to bind, in other words, attach an event handler to the submit button. And then basically the logic is if the page is valid, not sure what that means, but the table wrapper will slide up over 3 seconds. It's kind of interesting. We need to add a little bit more code. This one is page load, and this goes right before the closing script tag. Right where it says code from step 5 goes here, that's where you put it, because that's the step we're doing. And then notice here, this is kind of interesting, that we're attaching to the object with the class of attention. It will animate, and then it will animate again, and then it will fade out. So it's going to change first the width over 3 seconds, change the width again over 3 seconds, and then fade out slowly. It's kind of interesting. They also need us to jump into the code behind view of this file. And of course, you can do that a couple different ways. This is one way. Just open that up. And they also want us to add a little snippet of code here, and I'm trying to find the right spot. Right here at the bottom. Right below message visible equals true, we're going to add this little snippet of code. It sure doesn't like that. I'm trying to see if there's something I did here that is causing that problem. We'll see if it triggers any problems here. They also want us to go up to the monochrome CSS file. Yeah, it did. It did look like I was missing stuff. Do you see what I'm missing? I mean, I mean, it's copied exactly like it is in the book. Oh, I see what you're saying.
No, it's there.
No, that's right. Message visible here. Oh, well, let me show you what it's doing in the book. Yeah, it seems okay to me.
That one was added over to the left.
You know, one way I can fix that is I can just do this. Right. I guess I can't do it from there. Still flagging it. I guess I'm not too too worried about it. Because it might be something that's fixed later. So let's just go with it. Let's go back to that monochrome CSS file. And we are going to add a style for that attention class. Let's just put that way at the bottom. Oops. Let's go ahead and save it. In fact, let's just save all of our work so far. We also want to add this same declaration to the other theme as well, as you would anticipate. You don't want to do it just on one and not the other. And go ahead and save. Now I'm going to go ahead and run this, even though we have an error that's flagging. So let's go ahead and launch the site here. Now I don't want to run the last successful build, so we do need to figure out why we're having this issue. Yeah, are you guys getting this error also? Anybody? Nobody's getting that error. Okay, good. Now I don't feel so bad. Yeah, it is, right? Because then, you know, if I was the only one, then we'd have an issue. For those of you that are not getting the error, go ahead and launch it, fill out the form, submit it, and then you should see something that looks like what we have in the book here, where you get this box that looks like this. So I'll let you guys do that. If you're successful, go ahead. If you're in my situation, welcome to the club. Or let's try to figure out how to actually fix this. Okay, well, somebody seemed to have found the issue here, and let's see if that's actually correct. So way back up in step 1, and I'll bring that back over to the screen here. Maybe give me a sec. We put the CSS class in, but I don't think we added the run at server on the paragraph because that's not like a normal thing that you do necessarily. All right, this is the code behind. So let's find that label. There's the label. Oh, you know, and sure enough, I didn't add the paragraph at all, did I? So we added the CSS class with the self-closing tag, and then right after it, we needed to add this paragraph. So, and if we weren't switching editions of the book for next semester, I would probably flag that in my PDF so I wouldn't forget it. But yeah, we don't have that paragraph, so of course it's not going to find this if it's not there. Makes sense. Good job finding that, Colleen. Thank you. We're in the contact form ASCX. So it was back on step 1 of this try it out exercise where we changed the CSS class. Remember that? And then we were also supposed to add this paragraph tag, but we didn't. I was just looking at the bolded CSS class and just kind of moved past it. And really that should have been bolded too in the book, so that would be what I would have done. At this point we should be okay, so let's go ahead and launch it. And we're going to run without debugging. All right. And then we do want to go to the contact form. Let's fill it out. It's kind of slick, isn't it? How it gets rid of the form. I wouldn't call it the tastiest of effects, but it's not, it's not too bad. I'm going to try it again. Let's just do a refresh. It's kind of zoomed in a little bit. That's kind of cool. All right, well, that completes that try it out exercise. Oh, no doubt. It is. Oh, yeah, thank you for your message. Oh, that's right. It should say the box that says message sent. So now what did I screw up? So we put the CSS in, right? So now what code did I miss? Okay, so for as goofy as this is, folks, a hard refresh worked for me. Thank you for asking me to do that. So I don't know if you caught it there as it was refreshing. Now, how did I do that? Just Word, Excel, and PowerPoint all at once. So this is what it should do. If it doesn't do it like mine didn't, now it's not doing it again. There it is, okay. Okay. Now, while that, I would say, well, that is kind of cool, I think it's also kind of ugly. I mean, that's just a personal opinion. I would never put that on a website, but it just shows you that you can. Okay? So take some of those effects with a grain of salt, because I think there's an overuse and the point where it kind of looks amateurish.
What's your opinion about like the weight wheel?
I don't like that either.
Users like to know that something's
Right, but what's happening?
nothing.
Nothing. It's not actually showing you progress. You just put an image on the screen that happens to rotate. Doesn't mean that anything's happening. Right? So, yeah, that's kind of my opinion on it. That's a really good question, though, Brian. I'm not a fan. But just because I'm not a fan doesn't mean that you're not a fan.
Yeah.
And you always take it with a grain of salt when the book was written, and the fact that there's maybe more modern techniques that are better.
I know here we just kind of simulated a wait period, but
Right.
if there is something in interaction, is it good to make?
Generally speaking, I mean, you think about like how your operating system works. Like if you're on a Mac, you get the hourglass. Or if you're on a PC, you get the spin wheel, or whatever it is. Well, yeah, one of those. I work on both OSs, so I always forget. But yeah, usually it's considered good practice to have some sort of an indicator that your computer's not locked up, that you're waiting for something to happen. So even if it is an animated GIF and it's not really indicating progress, at least something's happening that makes it look like something's happening. So, and then even if you do use something like a progress bar, then you get into the situation, and I'm sure you guys can relate, where you have the progress bar and it's cruising along and it seems like something's happening and it gets to that 99% and it sticks there for a while because really it's still happening. So it depends on what you're monitoring the progress of. That's really a good way to say it. Some progress indicators are actually based upon the percentage of stuff that's being done or the amount of the file that's being moved, and in that case it's helpful. Yeah, but generally speaking, users do like some sort of indication. I think personally what might work best is just a little message that says, this is going to take a few seconds, please wait. You want to put an animated GIF with it to make it look like it's doing something? It's up to you. I mean, I think Microsoft and Apple both have gotten to the point now in their OSs where you do like an upgrade and they're like, this is going to take a while. And I always find that I think the Mac OS now, they give you an estimate of how much time's left, right? And it's always an overestimate, which is good because that way you go out and get a sandwich, you come back and it's done, and you're happy. We have one last exercise left here, and maybe in some ways, for some of you, this might be one of the more useful tools. I mean, the jQuery animations and capability of controlling objects is really cool, but one thing that is kind of interesting is actually using jQuery to help with your validation. So let's see if we can get this going in the few minutes we have left here in class. It would be kind of nice to finish the chapter. It says open. All right, they want us to actually do what we just did, which is look at the contact form in the browser. So let's go ahead and do that. And they want us to look at the source. And then they want us to find the input field for the user's name. And what I'm going to do to kind of make this easier is they want us to search for a span. Of course, there's 28 of them. So let me find the right one. Okay, so basically the better choices here, span ID equals main. Oops. Oh, I see. I was spelling it wrong. So span ID equals CP main. Content required field validator 1. Okay, fortunately it's this first one here. And then it says scroll down to the end of the code and you'll see a large chunk of JavaScript code that's responsible for the validation. Right? And boy, that's a lot of code, right? Did we write that code? No. We didn't. We are utilizing the built-in tools in Visual Studio. And, frankly, what's happening at this point is when these tools were released, they were pretty revolutionary. Everybody used them because they're built into the environment. But a lot of coders now are actually kind of switching their approach so that you have simpler ways to do the validation. I mean, HTML5 itself has helped a lot. But if you can use jQuery's tools to trim down on some of this code, in fact, the code is significantly simpler just because of the syntax changes the selectors. So, all right, let's close this up here. Go back to Visual Studio. And we want to add a new item. And then the thing that we're looking for a global application class. So if you want to type that in and do it like this, of course we're working with C#, so make sure you choose that. And the default name that they give us is absolutely fine. Now, whether or not this is the best place to locate it, that can actually be kind of a matter of opinion, I suppose. I put it right in the root. All right, so there's the global file. And what they want us to do is find the application start method, which is the first one that's listed here, and then we're going to add our code to this spot. You can replace the comment if you want. I'm actually going to leave it alone. No harm done. Let's go ahead and format that while we're here.
Put it in the wrong spot.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
I think it's in the
Yeah, and then of course it wouldn't work when we got to the show part of it all, right? Let's format the whole darn document. Still didn't format it. Okay, well, nothing like a little manual work here. All right. Make sure that you adjust your library to the right version, which for me is 3.3.1. Save your work, close the file. In fact, let's go ahead and close up all the stuff that's sitting there. Next thing they want us to open up is the web config file. And in the app settings area, they want us to add a little something. And that is and I'm checking this real carefully here because I already have, basically they're wanting us to add this line of code. But I'm noticing that the value is different right here. So on my source, it says that it should say value web forms. So let's do that, web forms. We got that in there, go ahead and save it. And then also go to your master page. I'm going to collapse some of these folders here. Bring up that Frontend Master. And in the script manager, they want us to make an adjustment here. And basically what we're doing is we're setting it up so that we can just refer to this, and I'm Control-Zing that. Because really, here we indicate a path, but now we're going to switch this so that it is named. So we're using the name attribute. And the reason this works, do you remember in the previous step where we added the reference to that reference.js file? This is why this works, because we have that reference placed. Go ahead and save that one too. And then I'm checking back in the global here. And this is the part that's kind of key, and the book tries to point this out, that whatever we call jQuery here, the path that we had originally listed in that other file is just being replaced by virtue of this code here. That's the why it works. All right. Ultimately, the whole point here is to kind of just make things work a little bit more smoothly. I think the main trick is that we are getting jQuery to do some of this work for us rather than some of the code that was before. And then what they're also wanting us to see is the difference in the output and the view source once this comes up on the screen. So if you have everything saved and ready to go ahead and launch the page again. Let's bring it up on screen. Fill out the form. Okay. And the point is, you guys notice validation is still working, obviously. And then they want you to go in here and just basically look. And I'm going to just do a control find here. And I'm looking for data dash val dash control. Oops, I got to spell it right. Control validate CP main contact form name, which is the one that I'm on right here. And I know this is a little hard to see on my screen, so I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so I can see that code. And notice how the validator went through and put in a whole bunch of stuff for us automatically. How that is happening is basically one of the back-end functions of jQuery is what's doing that. All right. Folks, that actually ends the chapter. believe it or not. jQuery is really fun to play with. It is tightly integrated. Microsoft is a big proponent of it, just like Google is. In fact, most people that do any sort of coding for web, more on the application end of things, jQuery is an essential tool in their toolbox. And we managed to finish another chapter, which is great. And press forward. We'll see you next week.